President Trump is infuriated over a leak to the Washington Post. The paper reporting the president's national security advisors warned him not to congratulate Russian President Vladimir Putin on his election victory. But the president did it anyway. Let's discuss with CNN senior political commentator Jennifer Granholm and CNN political commentator Steve Cortes, a former Trump campaign advisor. It's good to have you both here.
Thank you.
Forget about, of course he's angry. Nobody likes leaks. You ran the governor's shop in Michigan. You don't like leaks. Nobody wants leaks. Okay. You never had a single leak. Not that you want to remember anyway. So let's talk about the substance of the matter. He has the call. He congratulates the president. The national security advisors didn't want him doing that. Why? Because they don't believe in the democracy of the process there.
All right, friends, welcome back to State Line Media. At a campaign rally, Trump froze mid-sentence for 30 seconds as the teleprompter scrolled and the crowd went silent. When he resumed, he blamed the crew and the platform before storming off stage while his own supporters began booing him and the video went viral within hours. This actually happened, not in a movie, not in a political satire, at a Trump rally in Iowa. And if you think this is just another weird moment in a long line of weird moments from a president who has always been unconventional, you are missing the bigger picture, because what happened in that arena in Iowa is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom. It is a signal. And it arrived at a moment when the political environment was already crackling with tension, when the White House was already facing questions it could not answer.
This isn't just bad behavior, Chris. This is a crime. And this has been happening throughout the Trump presidency, that highly classified, highly secure documents are being leaked to the media. So this needs to be figured out. Somebody needs to be put in handcuffs, quite frankly. So,
well, he's got to inspire more loyalty among his people also by maybe staying on message and doing what they advise him to do. How about that?
But he's the president. That's the problem there. That's my other issue, okay? The president does not take his orders from anyone, including even very important advisors like the National Security Council.
But do you like the call he made in terms of what he said to Putin and what he didn't say? Are you okay with that?
Well, we don't know exactly what he said, but, I find it ironic, for instance, he was asked about this yesterday.
When the president's approval ratings were already in dangerous territory, and when the coalition that put him back in the White House was already showing signs of stress fractures that had not been there before, let me take you inside that rally. Let me tell you what actually happened, why it matters, and what it tells us about where this presidency is headed. The rally was supposed to be about tariffs. Specifically, Trump was in Iowa to defend his aggressive trade policies, the ones that have placed heavy taxes on goods from China, Canada, Europe, and other trading partners. He wanted to make the case that the short-term pain farmers are feeling right now is worth the long-term gain of rebuilding American manufacturing. He wanted to tell the crowd that he was fighting for them, that he understood their struggles, and that the tariffs would eventually pay off.
Prince of Saudi Arabia and start immediately criticizing their civil rights record, their human rights record in Saudi Arabia. In other words, there's a lot of leaders around the world who don't operate by American standards. We know that. It doesn't mean that we can pick and choose the leaders of the world. It does mean we have to negotiate and work with them for our interests, including some really bad guys, and Putin's one of them.
Well, and clearly he's been doing that with Saudi Arabia all along, privately and now publicly. What do you think of this situation?
First of all, I think that I understand the concern about leaks, but I think the bigger issue is the fact that he would not stand up for America's interests when people here are being impacted today by the Russian intervention in our election.
That was the plan. That was the message. That was why he flew to Iowa. But here is the thing about Iowa. It is not a place where tariffs are an abstract policy debate. It is a place where tariffs are personal. Iowa is one of the biggest agricultural states in the country. Its farmers depend on export markets, especially China, to buy their soybeans, their corn, their pork. When trade wars escalate, when China responds to American tariffs by buying from Brazil or Argentina instead, Iowa farmers feel it immediately. Crop prices drop, unsold inventory piles up, income projections evaporate. Financial stress becomes a daily reality for farming families who were already operating on thin margins. So when Trump came to Iowa to sell the tariffs as a necessary sacrifice,
in our electric grid, what are the impacts that our allies are feeling? Because does he support NATO? Is he going to stand up for his strongest ally, Great Britain? What's the impact on staff? There's a reason why this leaked, because staff is horrified that he's not following their suggestions. How does this impact Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who has to stand up there and defend it? How does it affect Mike Pence, who today is giving a speech at the OAS criticizing Venezuela about having fair elections, fair and free elections. So the impact on them, and then you look at the impact on the Republicans who were asked about this in a gaggle.
He was walking into a room full of people who were making that sacrifice every single day and were not sure the payoff was ever coming. That is not a hostile crowd. A hostile crowd would have been easier to dismiss. That is a frustrated crowd. And frustrated supporters are more dangerous to a political leader than any opponent could ever be, because frustrated supporters are still in the tent. They are still wearing the hats. They are still showing up, but they are starting to wonder if the person they showed up for is actually delivering on the promises that brought them there. And then the freeze happened. Trump was mid-speech. Reports say he was in the middle of praising Texas spirit, which is itself a slightly odd thing to be doing at an Iowa rally, and suggests the teleprompter content was not exactly tailored to the room. And then the words stopped.
Yesterday, and they were like stunned because they've got to go out and defend it. Not just the ones who are elected today, but the ones who are running for office. It has a trickle effect that's terrible.
But I think, too, what I would defend, again, we don't know exactly what on the phone call. What I can defend, because it's known, are the policies of Donald Trump regarding Russia. We're constantly told by his critics that he's somehow a puppet of Putin. Well, he's not a very good puppet if he is, because what has he done? He's armed the Ukraine. He slapped sanctions on the Soviet Union, or excuse me, on Russia. He went to Warsaw and gave probably the most anti-Russia speech since the Cold War. So both in words and deeds, he's making life difficult for Vladimir Putin.
Not a brief pause to let a cheer die down. Not a dramatic beat for effect. A full 30 seconds of silence, long enough for the event staff, who were apparently working from a cue system that interpreted extended silence as the end of the speech, to start playing music.
So, you believe that? You think that he's been too tough on Russia, or tough?
I mean, come on. I mean, Steve, why do you think he's getting all of this criticism? It's not just because people want to criticize Trump. It's because objectively, he has been in a bromance with Putin. He never confronts him face to face. He never talks about it. I mean, if you look at the readout of the two, you say you don't know what happened on the call. It's because the U.S. in its readout had 4 sentences. The reason why we know what happened is because the Russian readout was much more transparent. It had 11 topics that were discussed.
Right.
Long enough for the crowd to go from waiting to uncertain to uncomfortable. Long enough for the moment to be unmistakably clear on every video recording that would circulate in the hours and days that followed. 30 seconds of silence at a podium in front of thousands of people is a very long time. In a normal speech, a pause that long would be extraordinary. It would immediately signal to everyone watching that something has gone wrong. And because this is not the first time something like this has happened, because there have been other moments, other pauses, other apparent moments of disorientation at public events, the freeze did not get processed as a one-off technical glitch. It got processed as part of a pattern that the White House has consistently failed to fully address, a pattern that independent observers have been documenting and cataloging, a pattern that feeds directly into a question that will not go away, no matter how many times the president's team denies it. But I think to what I would defend, again, we don't know exactly what went on the phone call. What I can defend, because it's known, are the policies of Donald Trump regarding Russia. We're constantly told by his critics that he's somehow a puppet of Putin. Well, he's not a very good puppet if he is, because what has he done? He's armed Ukraine. He slapped sanctions on Russia. He went to Warsaw and gave probably the most anti-Russia speech since the Cold War. So both in words and deeds, he's making life difficult for Vladimir Putin. You believe that? Do you think that he's been too tough on Russia, or tough? Come on. I mean, Steve, why do you think he's getting all of this criticism? It's not just because people want to criticize Trump. It's because objectively, he has been in a bromance with Putin. He never confronts him face to face. He never talks about it. I mean, if you look at the readout of the two, you say you don't know what happened on the call. It's because the U.S. readout had 4 sentences. The reason why we know what happened is because the Russian readout was much more transparent. It had 11 topics that were discussed, a full 6 paragraphs. The bottom line is, he, for whatever weird reason, or maybe there's something to it, he cannot bring himself to criticize Putin in the same way that he brings himself to criticize people like Kim Jong-un. He can't do it. It's unfair to single out Russia. For example, he's had a lot of interactions with the premier of China, with Xi. I've never seen him publicly. Have you gone to his Twitter feed? He has criticized China. He has not publicly criticized them for their human rights record, right? Which is demonstrably worse than after the freeze came the explosion. Trump, apparently furious about what he perceived as a technical failure or crew error, launched into a rant about the stage setup. He called the workers crappy. He said things were falling down. He said the platform was the worst platform. And then came the line that would become the most shared piece of the entire sequence. The platform, he said, was tilting to the left. Too many things tilting to the left these days. It was a joke. And maybe he should, and maybe he should. But the point is, the leader of the United States has to set an example and set a tone for what we will accept around the world. We push democracy around the world. The fact that he attacked us, it was an attack on us. It was Russia declaring war on us by attacking our election. He can't say anything about that. What this is really about, and the reason that people focus so much on Russia, is there's almost a neurosis on the left. People still can't accept that he won in 2016, and they need to come up with an excuse. They need to come up with a boogeyman, a scapegoat. And Russia, sadly, for whatever reason, has become that convenient undo the win. And none of this, nothing is ever going to happen, whatever. They're trying to. All I hear is resist and impeach, and, well, it depends on who they is. You know, if you're talking about big mouths on Twitter, a classic Trump recovery move. Take something that went wrong, a physical tilt, a technical problem, and turn it into a political punchline about liberal bias. It is the kind of move Trump has pulled off countless times over the years. The kind of move that, in a different room with a different crowd on a different day, might have landed perfectly. The crowd would have laughed, the energy would have shifted, the awkwardness would have been redirected into enthusiasm. But it did not land in Iowa on this day with this crowd because the Iowa farmers in that room were not in the mood for jokes about tilting to the left. They were in the mood to be heard. They were in the mood for acknowledgement that the tariffs they were being asked to sacrifice for were actually hurting them. They were in the mood for something more than a punchline. Who cares what they say? It's about our official process and our institutions. We have a president, his name is Donald Trump. It's just unusual that this man will come after me for something that I say on a TV show when I'm relatively inconsequential to him. But Vladimir Putin plays a stupid video with missiles crashing down on Florida, directed right where he spends most of his time in Mar-a-Lago. Not a word. Let me ask you the question then. Why? I don't know. I asked him this, and he didn't give us the answer. I don't believe I have any proof that Vladimir Putin has any kind of specific control over Donald Trump. But that's what makes his behavior so odd, because this is a man who's always spoiling for a fight. You know this about him. It's what you guys like about him, but not with Putin. And that's why I'm asking him. Don't worry about arguing about Mueller. Mueller's not going anywhere if he's in his right mind, but why don't you tell him? And when the punchline arrived instead of the acknowledgement, the frustration that had been building in that room found its voice. The crowd started booing. Let me stop here and emphasize how unusual this is. Trump rallies are not spaces where you typically hear boos directed at the speaker. The entire architecture of a Trump rally is built around enthusiasm, around cheering, around the collective experience of being in a room full of people who share your political identity and are celebrating it together. That energy is one of the things that has made Trump's rallies so politically effective for so long. They generate a kind of enthusiasm that translates into donations, into volunteer activity, into turnout. The boos at the Iowa rally are not just embarrassing in the moment, they are structurally damaging. That's what you're doing. He hasn't gotten into a verbal fight, I'll agree with you on that. And I don't know if he should or shouldn't, that's up to him. We elected him to be, he could have slapped sanctions on day one when Congress passed it, but they didn't. He got into a literal fight by arming Ukraine, something that Putin hates. He also got into a literal fight by raining American cruise missiles onto a base in Syria where there were Russian jets. So this is not a man who's afraid to confront Russia. Well, we'll see. He's got a chance, he says, upcoming that they're going to meet. We'll see what he decides to do there. If not only for his own personal interest, he's got to take care of his allies, and the UK has a serious beef with Putin right now. Damaging to the rally format itself, because if the people in the room are booing, if the farmers who came to hear Trump are expressing vocal displeasure while he is still on stage, that energy does not stay in Iowa. It travels. The clips travel. And the message those clips send to donors, to operatives, to Republican candidates running in competitive districts, to everyone watching the political environment for signals about what is coming, is that Trump's base is not as solid as the rally attendance numbers suggest. That enthusiasm is not synonymous with support, that people can show up and still be angry. And angry people who show up to a rally and boo are very close to the edge of becoming people who show up to the polls and either vote differently or do not show up at all. Trump's response to the boos was to call them the product of paid agitators, people planted in the crowd to create the appearance of dissent. That is a familiar framing. It is the same framing that gets applied whenever crowd behavior at a Trump event does not match the expected enthusiasm. And it might be reassuring to his most committed supporters, the ones who are already inclined to believe that any negative development is the product of Democratic dirty tricks. But it is not reassuring to the people who were actually in that room and know whether they were paid agitators or Iowa farmers genuinely struggling with the economic consequences of tariff disruptions. It is not reassuring to the Republican strategists who watch that kind of response and understand what it actually means when a candidate attributes genuine base frustration to paid plants. And it is not reassuring to the farmers themselves who, if they hear that their concerns are being dismissed as orchestrated opposition, are going to be even more frustrated going forward than they were when they booed. The paid agitator explanation is not an answer to the economic frustration. It is a dismissal of it. And dismissing the economic frustration of farmers in Iowa is not a strategy for improving your standing in Iowa. Let me give you the broader economic context that makes this rally moment so significant as a political data point. Trump's tariff policy has always had a complicated relationship with agricultural states. Farmers are among the constituencies most exposed to retaliatory tariffs from trading partners because agricultural exports are a significant part of what the United States trades and are a natural target for countries that want to apply economic pressure in response to American tariff action. China specifically has historically been one of the largest buyers of American soybeans, corn, and other agricultural products. When trade tensions escalate, China has responded by sourcing those products from other countries, Brazil, Argentina, instead of from American farmers. The result is falling prices for American crops, accumulating unsold inventory, and declining income for the farming families who are counting on those export markets. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It happened during the first round of Trump tariff escalations. It is happening again, and the farmers in that Iowa room know it because they are living it. So when Trump comes to Iowa to defend the tariffs, he is not coming to a room full of people who are abstractly concerned about trade policy. He has come into a room full of people who can put a specific dollar figure on what the tariffs are costing them, and that specificity, that personal farm-level bank account experience of the cost, is what produced the boos, not paid agitators, economic reality. Let me walk you through why this moment matters in 4 interconnected ways. First, the freeze adds to a pattern that the White House cannot explain away with individual incident responses. The Iowa freeze is not the first time Trump has had a notable pause or moment of apparent disorientation at a public event. There have been other moments, other appearances, where observers have cataloged and shared similar pauses. The cumulative record of these moments is what creates the pattern problem. Any single instance can be explained. Bad audio, a teleprompter malfunction, a moment of distraction after a long day of travel and limited sleep. But when the instances accumulate and when each new instance is immediately connected by viewers to the previous ones, the pattern becomes the story, regardless of the innocent explanations available for any individual moment. The White House's approach, deny, dismiss, cite official health statements, threaten legal action, does not address the pattern. It only addresses individual incidents, which means the pattern continues to grow as new moments arrive. The Iowa freeze is the latest addition. It will not be the last. And each new addition makes the pattern harder to dismiss and the health transparency argument harder to avoid. The only response that actually addresses the pattern is transparency, the kind of full, independent, publicly available medical disclosure that would allow people to assess the claims being made on one side against the evidence being observed on the other. That disclosure has not been provided, and until it is, the pattern story continues to compound. Second, farmers booing a president they voted for over tariff pain is one of the most politically dangerous things that can happen in an agricultural state. Political coalitions are built on the assumption that the people inside them have reasons to stay. Farmers voted for Trump in significant numbers. They voted for him because of promises that were specific and economic, that his trade policies would benefit American agriculture, that he would fight for American farmers against unfair competition, that the deals he made would improve farm incomes and market access. Some of those promises were genuinely believed by the people making them. Others may have been more aspirational than realistic, given the structural dynamics of global agricultural trade. But the promises were made, and the farmers who heard them remembered them. And when the economic reality of the tariff wars lands differently than the promises suggested, when crop prices fall and export markets close and income projections miss, the people who believe the promises do not simply update their priors and move on. They get angry, and anger that starts as private frustration expressed in dinner table conversations or in complaints to local agricultural extension offices eventually finds a public voice. The Iowa rally gave it a very public voice. And that voice, boos in a room that was supposed to be friendly, directed at a president who was supposed to be their guy, is exactly the kind of clarifying moment that gets processed by every Republican candidate running in an agricultural district and produces the kind of quiet, anxious recalibration that ultimately shows up in less enthusiastic volunteer recruitment, less aggressive fundraising asks, and slightly lower base turnout on Election Day. Slightly lower base turnout in tight races is the difference between winning and losing, and Iowa is not the only agricultural state in the country where farmers are feeling the tariff pain. Third, the tilting to the left line is a perfect encapsulation of the political problem, a joke that was supposed to land but did not because the audience was not in the mood for it. Trump has always been good at using humor to redirect awkward moments, to take something that went wrong and convert it into a crowd-pleasing punchline that restores the energy in the room. The tilting to the left line was an attempt at exactly that. Take the technical problem, the teleprompter or platform that was physically tilting, and make it a political joke about leftward drift that gets the crowd cheering and moves past the freeze. In a different room, on a different day, with a different crowd, it might have worked. Trump has pulled off that kind of recovery countless times, but it did not work in Iowa on this day, and the reason it did not work is